It was a quiet afternoon when the phone rang at the local police station, its shrill tone cutting through the stillness like a knife. Officer Sarah Hall, who had been sipping her coffee at the front desk, jolted upright, instinctively grabbing the receiver. "Sunnydale Police Department," she said, her voice calm but tinged with a professional alertness. There was a brief silence on the other end before a frail, shaking voice responded. "Please," the voice crackled, "you have to come. I need your help, my husband, he." The voice faltered. Sarah furrowed her brows and leaned forward, trying to make sense of what the woman was saying. "Calm down, ma'am. Tell me what's going on," Sarah replied, hoping to steady the woman's panic. I don't know how to explain. You won't believe me, but I swear, you have to arrest him. Please," the woman begged, her voice breaking. "My husband, he's dangerous. I don't know who he really is anymore." Sarah's grip on the phone tightened, now fully alert. This wasn't the typical distress call. Most of the time, it was a simple complaint or a misunderstanding. But something about this call, about the desperation in this woman's voice, was different. "Ma'am, I need you to breathe. Can you tell me your address?" Sarah's voice was steady, but inside, she was already preparing herself for whatever this call was leading to. I'm at 47 Maple Street. Please, hurry, he's going to hurt me, again." The words hung in the air like a chilling whisper, and Sarah's mind raced. Hurt me again. What could this woman mean? Was it an abusive situation? A domestic issue? Or was there something else at play? Regardless, it was clear that they couldn't wait. "I'll send a unit right away. Stay on the line with me for as long as you can," Sarah instructed, her mind already coordinating the nearest patrol car to head out to the location. "I can't, he's right here," the woman whispered. "He'll hear me. Please, hurry, before it's too late." The line clicked dead. Sarah stared at the receiver in disbelief for a moment before slamming the phone back into its holder. Her heart pounded in her chest as she jumped into action. She quickly radioed her colleagues. "Unit 4-3, this is 2-1. We have a possible emergency at 47 Maple Street. Female caller, distress, says her husband is dangerous. Over." The radio crackled back with a quick acknowledgement. "Roger that. On our way." Sarah's hand shook slightly as she put down the microphone. The call had rattled her more than she expected, and now she couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to walk into something much darker than a simple domestic dispute. The drive to Maple Street was quiet, but Sarah's mind raced with questions. What could an elderly man possibly be capable of? The caller had said her husband was 81. She couldn't fathom what kind of threat a frail old man could pose. Yet, the way the woman had begged for help. It was as though she had known something that no one else could understand. The squad car sped down the street, its siren cutting through the evening silence. As they neared the house, Sarah's eyes scanned the neighborhood. It was quiet, too quiet. The houses on Maple Street were old, their paint chipped, and their lawn sparse, but they were typical of this part of town. Nothing out of the ordinary, yet. When the car came to a stop in front of 47 Maple Street, Sarah's heart skipped a beat. The house loomed in front of them like a forgotten relic from another time. The porch light flickered weakly, and the lawn, overgrown and wild, seemed to mirror the disorder that lay behind the walls. She stepped out of the car, her boots crunching on the gravel. Her partner, Officer Ryan Daniels, followed closely behind. Together, they approached the front door, which was slightly ajar. Before they could knock, the door creaked open, and there stood the woman. A small, elderly figure in a faded house dress. Her hair was a tangled mess of silver, and her face was drawn and tired. But it was her eyes, the terror that shone in them, that stopped the officers in their tracks. "Please," she whispered, grabbing at Sarah's sleeve with surprising strength, "he's inside. You don't understand. He's not who you think he is. Sarah's instincts kicked in, and she immediately motioned for Ryan to take his position. Ma'am, you're safe now. Just tell us what's going on. The woman's trembling hands fluttered to her mouth, as if she was afraid to speak any further. You don't know what he's done, she whispered, her voice barely audible. He's changed. He's dangerous. Ryan leaned in slightly. Is he armed? Where is he? She shook her head. No. No weapons. But he has secrets. Dark ones. You need to arrest him now, before he does it again. The officers exchanged a look. What exactly had this woman been through? What had happened in this house? They had no answers, but they had a job to do. They stepped inside, following the woman through a narrow hallway that smelled faintly of dust and something else, something sour, like stale air and old memories. The house seemed frozen in time, as if nothing had changed for years. The walls were adorned with yellowed photographs of a family long forgotten, and a few old chairs were scattered around the dimly lit living room. The woman led them through the house until they reached the living room. There, sitting in an old armchair near the window, was the man. His frail form appeared to be asleep, but as the officers entered, his head lifted slowly. For a moment, Sarah and Ryan were taken aback. He looked ordinary. His skin was pale and wrinkled, his hair thin and gray. But it was his eyes, cold, unblinking, and vacant, that immediately sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. They were the eyes of a man who had seen something no one else could comprehend, and worse. They held a glimmer of something far more unsettling. He stared at them in silence, not offering a word, not even a greeting. The woman, trembling beside them, took a step back. He's not the man I married, she whispered, her voice barely audible. He changed. He's hiding something. Sir, Ryan called out, his voice firm, though there was a hint of uncertainty in it, we need to talk to you. Please, stand up. The old man didn't move. He simply stared, unblinking. His expression was unreadable, but there was a strange tension in the air, as though he were waiting for something, or someone. Without warning, the woman stepped forward, her voice desperate. You have to arrest him now. He's dangerous. You have no idea what he's done. The officers exchanged a glance. What could a frail, elderly man possibly be hiding? Why was the woman so terrified? Suddenly, the old man spoke. His voice was low, gravelly, and somehow, unnervingly calm. I think it's time you learned the truth, he said, his eyes narrowing slightly. The words hit like a punch to the gut, and Sarah felt her stomach twist in unease. What was he talking about? And what kind of truth was he hiding in this silent house? Before Sarah or Ryan could respond, the man stood up slowly, his movements stiff and deliberate. The woman's breath caught in her throat. No. No, please, she whispered, taking a step back. He can't tell them. But it was too late. The old man was already moving toward the back of the room, toward a door that led deeper into the house. And so the mystery deepened. The old man's movements were slow but deliberate, as though each step he took was carefully calculated. The officers followed him cautiously, unsure of what to expect. The house was eerily silent, save for the soft creak of floorboards beneath their feet. Sarah's heart raced as she exchanged a quick look with Ryan. They both knew they were entering uncharted territory now. The woman had been insistent, frantic even, that her husband was hiding something dark, something dangerous. But what was it? What could possibly be so unsettling that it had driven her to call the police and beg them to arrest him? The old man reached the door at the far end of the room. He paused briefly, turning to face them, his expression unchanged. There was a coldness to his eyes that Sarah couldn't shake, as though he were a man who had lived many lifetimes, seen unspeakable things, and carried a burden that no one could understand. With a deliberate motion, he turned the handle and opened the door. A wave of stale, musty air rushed out, and Sarah instinctively recoiled. The room beyond was dimly lit, and the scent of age and neglect hung in the air, thick with dust and decay. The man stepped into the room, but before Sarah or Ryan could follow, the woman, still standing in the hallway, spoke again, her voice trembling with terror. "Don't go in there," she pleaded, her hand outstretched as though to stop them. "Please, you don't know what's inside. He can't let you see it. You have to stop him." Sarah turned to face the woman, who was now visibly shaking, her face pale with fear. The officers had seen fear before, but this was different. The woman was not just afraid, she was terrified. The kind of terror that came from knowing something, but being powerless to stop it. "Ma'am," Ryan began, his voice steady but filled with concern, "we need to see what's in that room. You've been telling us your husband is hiding something. This could be the key to understanding why you're so afraid." The woman shook her head violently, her voice rising in a frantic plea. "No. You don't understand. He's not who you think he is. He's not human anymore." The words hung in the air, leaving Sarah and Ryan frozen in place, their minds struggling to process what they had just heard. Not human? What could she possibly mean by that? The man was elderly, frail, but surely he wasn't something else. But before either officer could respond, the old man's voice cut through the tension. "I think it's time you saw it for yourselves," he said, his voice unnervingly calm. "I've hidden it for long enough." With that, he stepped fully into the room, disappearing from sight. The door remained open, and the officers hesitated, exchanging another glance. Sarah's instinct screamed at her to turn away, but curiosity, and a growing sense of urgency, kept her feet rooted to the floor. She couldn't back down now. They had to understand what was happening in this house, what the old woman was so afraid of. With a deep breath, she motioned to Ryan. "Let's go." Together, they walked into the darkened room, their eyes slowly adjusting to the dim light. The space was small, cramped, and filled with an overwhelming sense of disorder. There were old boxes stacked haphazardly in the corners, pieces of furniture covered in dusty sheets, and stacks of what appeared to be old papers scattered across the floor. But what caught their attention immediately was the large metal chest at the center of the room. It was an old-fashioned trunk, the kind that might have been used in a time long past, heavy, rusted, and sealed shut with a thick lock. The chest was positioned in the center of the room as if it were the focal point of everything. The rest of the room seemed to revolve around it. The old man stood next to the chest, his hand resting lightly on top of it, as if he were guarding something precious. He didn't look at Sarah or Ryan, but his presence was imposing, as though he were daring them to ask the questions that were burning in their minds. "You want to know the truth?" he said, his voice a low murmur. "You want to know what my wife is so afraid of?" Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she stepped closer to the chest. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing in her ears. The silence in the room was oppressive, thick with anticipation. She could feel the weight of the moment, the sense that something monumental was about to unfold. The old man slowly, deliberately, reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, rusted key. It seemed too small for something so important, but he held it with reverence, almost as if it were a relic from another time. He inserted the key into the lock and turned it with a faint click. The sound seemed to reverberate throughout the room, and Sarah felt a chill crawl up her spine. The chest opened slowly, revealing its contents. At first, it seemed like nothing more than old clothes, tattered garments, faded and worn with age. But as Sarah's eyes adjusted, she saw something else. Something darker. Lying at the bottom of the chest was a small, wooden box. It was intricately carved, its surface covered in strange symbols and markings that made Sarah's skin crawl. She could feel the weight of it, the gravity of what it represented. The old man leaned over and gently lifted the box, cradling it in his hands like a fragile treasure. He turned to face the officers, his eyes now locked on theirs, piercing and intense. "This is what she's been afraid of," he said softly. "This is what I've hidden for so long." Without another word, he opened the box. Inside, there was something so horrifying, so grotesque, that Sarah's stomach twisted in revulsion. The box wasn't empty. It contained a collection of small, perfectly preserved items. There were fingers, severed, mummified fingers, arranged neatly inside the box as though they had been placed there with great care. Alongside the fingers were other body parts, a nose, an ear, and something that looked disturbingly like a tongue. It was a grisly collection, a macabre trophy, preserved for years, but for what purpose? The officers stood frozen, their minds struggling to comprehend what they were seeing. "This," Sarah began, her voice shaky, "what is this?" The old man's face remained impassive. "This," he said slowly, "is the price of immortality." The room seemed to grow colder with each passing second. The wooden box in the old man's hands gleamed faintly in the dim light, casting long shadows across the room. Sarah and Ryan stood motionless, staring at the grotesque contents, severed body parts, each one preserved with a chilling precision. The air felt heavy, thick with dread, as if something terrible was about to unfold. The old man's face remained impassive, his eyes steady as he regarded the two officers. He didn't seem to notice the shock and disbelief in their expressions. Instead, he was focused on something else, something far beyond the confines of this room, beyond the officers standing before him. It was as though his mind had drifted to another time, another place. "Immortality," he repeated, his voice almost a whisper, but it carried the weight of centuries. "You can't truly understand it, not yet. But you will." The word sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. She had seen a lot during her years on the force, violent crimes, tragic accidents, and inexplicable situations, but nothing, had prepared her for this. The macabre display in front of her felt like something ripped straight from a nightmare. But it was real. And it was happening right now. "Sir," Ryan said, his voice trembling with a mix of disbelief and authority, "I need you to tell us what's going on. What is all this? Why these body parts?" The old man looked at him, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Sarah thought he might not answer at all. But then, in a voice that sent an eerie chill through the room, he began to speak again. "It started long ago," he said slowly, his eyes flickering with a far-off memory. "Many years ago, I stumbled upon something, a secret, hidden away in the pages of an ancient book. It spoke of life, of death, and of something beyond both." He paused, his hands gripping the box tighter. "It promised me immortality. But the price was steep. Far steeper than I could have ever imagined." Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she processed his words. Immortality? Was this man claiming to have discovered a way to live forever? It sounded like something out of a horror story, something impossible. But what she had seen in that box, the severed fingers, the ear, the tongue, began to make her question everything she thought she knew. "How?" she asked, her voice low and steady despite the chaos in her mind. "How did you do this? And why?" The old man's lips curled into a faint, bitter smile. "The ritual was simple, at first. I had to sacrifice pieces of myself. And with each piece I offered, I became more." He turned his gaze toward the box again. "At first, it was just a finger. I didn't know if it would work, but I had to try. I had to know. So I did it. And then another, and another. Each time, I grew stronger, more powerful, more alive." Sarah's stomach churned. The idea of sacrificing parts of his body, of self-mutilation, was unfathomable. Yet, standing before her was the proof that something deeply disturbing had been at work here. But the more I sacrificed, the old man continued, his voice hollow now, the more I realized I was losing something. I couldn't feel the same anymore. My mind grew, distorted. The more I took, the less I was truly me. And I couldn't stop. The immortality, the power it promised, became an obsession. And soon, I was no longer just taking pieces of myself. He looked at Sarah, his eyes dark and distant. I started taking from others. The words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. Her body went cold, and she could barely process what she was hearing. He had been killing people. Wait, Ryan said, his voice low with disbelief. You didn't just take your own body parts. You took others? How? The old man's lips twisted into a cruel smile. Yes. I had to. I needed to replace the parts one had lost. And the only way to do that was to take them from others. He paused, his eyes glinting with a mixture of sadness and madness. But it wasn't enough. No matter how many I took, it was never enough. Sarah's mind reeled. How many people had this man killed to sustain his twisted immortality? She glanced at the woman standing in the doorway, who was now shaking uncontrollably, tears streaming down her face. She had known. She had been living with this horror for God knows how long. Did she know? Sarah asked, her voice strained. Did your wife know what you were doing? The old man's eyes flickered, his expression faltering for just a moment before he regained his composure. At first, she didn't. She couldn't. But eventually, she realized. She saw the changes in me. She saw the darkness creeping in. She begged me to stop, but by then, I couldn't. The hunger for immortality had consumed me. And now. He trailed off, his voice dropping to a whisper. Now, it's too late. The silence in the room was suffocating. Sarah and Ryan exchanged a glance. What had they stumbled into? Was this really happening? Were they really listening to a man who had been alive for decades, maybe even centuries, at the cost of countless lives? Suddenly, the woman in the doorway stepped forward, her voice breaking the silence. You don't understand, she said, her eyes wide with fear. He's still doing it. He hasn't stopped. Even now, Before she could finish, the old man snapped his gaze toward her, his face twisting with anger. Shut up, he growled, his voice low and menacing. You don't know what you're talking about. I've given everything for this. I've sacrificed everything for the chance to live forever. And now you want me to stop? His eyes darkened, his body trembling with barely contained fury. You don't get to decide when it ends. I do. The woman took a step back, her face drained of color. She opened her mouth to speak again, but the words caught in her throat. Sarah and Ryan exchanged a quick glance. It was clear that they were dealing with a man who was far beyond reason, a man who had long crossed the line into madness. But what scared Sarah more was the reality of his words, he hadn't stopped. The sacrifices, the murders, were still happening. And if they didn't do something, more people could die. We need to stop this, Ryan said quietly, his voice tense. We need to arrest him before he does anything else. But as soon as the words left his mouth, the old man's expression shifted. His eyes narrowed, and a cold smile spread across his face. You think you can stop me? He asked, his voice dripping with mockery. You think arresting me will change anything? You can't stop what's already been set in motion. The ritual is complete. It's too late. The air in the room seemed to crackle with tension. The officers stepped back instinctively, but the old man didn't move. Instead, he lifted the box from the floor and held it up in front of him, as though it were some sort of sacred object. Look at this, he whispered. This is the key to everything. It's what gives me life. It's what makes me more than human. And you're too late to stop it. Suddenly, Sarah's mind raced. The box. Could it be that the box contained some sort of power? Something that could keep him alive forever? The idea was chilling, but there was no other explanation for the madness unfolding before them. The old man's eyes gleamed with a terrifying certainty. It's too late, he repeated. You can't stop me now. The silence after the old man's chilling words was like a scream that no one could hear. Sarah could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest as she and Ryan stood frozen, staring at the man who had just claimed that the ritual was complete, and that it was too late. The air in the room seemed to grow heavier by the second. Dust particles floated like ash in a still sky, and the dim light cast eerie shadows across the walls. The old man stood clutching the wooden box, his hands firm, his eyes burning with something inhuman. Pride? Madness? Power? Sarah wasn't sure anymore. The woman, his wife, had backed away toward the hallway. Her frail frame was trembling, her face pale and wet with tears. She was whispering something to herself now, over and over, like a prayer or a warning that had long lost its strength. Sarah finally broke the silence. We're not leaving without answers. Ryan nodded beside her, his jaw set. You said the ritual is complete. What does that mean? What happens now? The old man chuckled softly, too softly. It wasn't the laugh of someone amused. It was the sound of someone who knew something terrible, and had accepted it. I told you, he said, placing the box back onto the floor with great care, you wouldn't understand. You can't. No one ever really does, until they see it. See what? Sarah asked. What are we supposed to see? You've shown us body parts, told us you've lived beyond your time. But we still don't understand what this is. You will, the old man said, walking slowly to the far wall. He bent down, pressing his hand against the old floorboards. Because it's underneath us. Sarah and Ryan instinctively stepped back, their hands twitching near their weapons. They had walked into this house expecting a domestic disturbance, maybe a mentally unstable person. But what they had found was something else entirely. Something darker. Something ancient. The man pulled up a loose wooden plank from the floor. It groaned as it came free, revealing a hole, no, a tunnel, leading downward into pitch-black darkness. You buried something, Ryan said, stepping closer but not too close. Down there? No, the man said. I kept something down there. He looked back at them, eyes gleaming. You want to understand? Then go down. See for yourself. Sarah's instinct screamed no, but her sense of duty wouldn't let her turn away. They couldn't leave without knowing what was going on. If there were victims, if someone, or something, was down there, they had a responsibility to find it. She looked at Ryan. We go together. Ryan gave a tight nod. I've got your back. They pulled out their flashlights, illuminating the tunnel below. The walls were lined with rotting wood, and a damp, earthy smell rose up from the hole. The ladder was old but still intact. I'm not going down there, the woman whispered, clinging to the doorway. I begged you not to come here. I begged him to destroy it. You don't know what you're waking up. Then tell us, Sarah said sharply, already halfway down the ladder. Tell us what's down there. But the woman didn't answer. She just turned away, mumbling a name, Mikhail. Mikhail. Sarah had no time to ask who Mikhail was. She and Ryan descended into the dark. The air below was colder. Thicker. And strangely, buzzing. Their flashlights cut through the darkness to reveal a cramped, underground chamber. The walls were made of brick and dirt, held together by what looked like tree roots and iron supports. The floor was uneven, and there were carvings, symbols etched into the walls in an ancient language. In the center of the room stood a stone altar. And chained to that altar was a man. Or what was left of one. Sarah gasped, her light shaking as she pointed it at the figure. The man's skin was gray, stretched tight over his bones. His eyes were open, but lifeless. Yet he was breathing. Barely. Is he alive? Ryan asked, voice hushed in horror. I think so, Sarah replied. But how? Who is he? A rustling sound came from behind them. They spun around, guns drawn, but it was the old man. He had followed them down, moving with unnatural ease. That, he said, pointing to the chained figure, is Mikhail. The first. The first what? Sarah asked. The first man I sacrificed, the old man said, his voice quiet now. He wasn't supposed to live. But something went wrong. The ritual, if done imperfectly, doesn't just take life. It traps it. You kept him alive? Ryan asked, horrified. For how long? The old man didn't blink. 76 years. Sarah nearly dropped her flashlight. 76 years? This is madness, Ryan said. This is a torture chamber. No, the old man corrected. This is the birthplace of my eternity. Sarah stepped toward Mikhail. The man blinked once. His lips moved ever so slightly. She leaned in. Help me. The whisper was so faint, so broken, it barely reached her ears. Sarah turned back to the old man. We're ending this. You're under arrest for kidnapping, torture, murder, whatever else we find here. But the old man only smiled. You can't arrest me, he said. Not anymore. Suddenly, the ground shook. The walls groaned. Dust fell from above. What the hell is that? Ryan asked, stumbling backward. The symbols on the walls began to glow faintly, red, then purple, then an eerie blue. No, the woman's voice called from above. No, he's opened the gate. You fools, you made him open it. What gate? Sarah yelled upward. But the old man was laughing now. The kind of laugh that made the hair on your arms rise. I told you, he said, his voice rising above the chaos. You were too late. From the far corner of the underground room, the wall began to crack. Something pushed through it, something wet, dark, slithering. Ryan raised his weapon. Sarah, we need to get out. Now. But Sarah couldn't look away. Because the chained man, Mikhail, was now screaming. His voice didn't sound human anymore. It was a howl. A roar. The slithering thing burst from the wall, a mass of black, writhing limbs, eyes where there should be none, and mouths that whispered in languages Sarah didn't understand. It didn't just look alive, it looked ancient. The old man raised his arms, as if embracing the thing. It's here, he cried. The rebirth. Ryan fired. 1 shot. 2. But the bullets seemed to vanish into the creature's body. Sarah grabbed Mikhail, trying to break the chains. But they were old and sealed shut. His eyes locked onto hers. Burn it, he whispered. Burn what? She asked, panicked. The box. She looked back up. The wooden box. The thing that had started it all. Ryan, the box, she shouted. We have to destroy the box. Ryan climbed back up the ladder, the creature now slithering toward them, whispering her name. Sarah didn't know how it knew her name. She didn't want to know. She could feel it behind her. The heat. The pressure. The evil. Then fire, blinding fire. Ryan had smashed the box and lit it with a flare from his belt. The creature screamed, a sound so loud it fractured the air itself. Mikhail gasped, and was gone. The chains snapped. The walls collapsed. Everything turned to ash. The hospital's ceiling buzzed with fluorescent light. Sterile, white, too bright. Sarah blinked against it, her mind still clouded by smoke, screams, and the heat of that unholy fire. She had survived the inferno, but the images still played in her mind like a film stuck on repeat: the creature, the chained man's last whisper, the old man's haunting laugh, and the box. She sat up abruptly. A sharp sting flared in her side. Her body was bruised, ribs tender, but she didn't care. She reached instinctively for the inside pocket of her charred uniform, now folded on a nearby chair. The nurses had cleaned her up and dressed her wounds, but they hadn't searched her belongings. Her fingers found it immediately, the wooden fragment. Still warm. Still pulsing. She stared at it in her palm, just a sliver of the box, no bigger than a coin. Its surface was carved with the same symbols she'd seen etched into the chamber walls beneath the old house. Despite the fire, it hadn't burned. Not even singed. It had survived, just like her. But unlike her, it wanted something. Because it was whispering. Sarah clenched it in her fist, trying to ignore the sound. It wasn't a voice exactly. It was more like a thought, an idea pressing in on her from the inside. A memory that wasn't hers. She stumbled out of the bed, ignoring the sharp protest from her body, and reached for her phone. Ryan answered on the third ring. "Sarah? You hear it too?" There was a pause. "Yeah." He didn't have to ask what she meant. They were both hearing the same thing. Feeling the same pull. The box may have been broken, but something inside it had survived. And it was still connected to them. "I haven't slept," he added. "Every time I close my eyes, I see that thing's eyes. I hear voices. Like they're trapped in my head." Sarah rubbed her temple. "We need answers. Real ones. The old man's gone. The house is gone. But something didn't die in that fire. And I think we were meant to see it. Meant to carry it." Ryan was silent. Then, finally, he said, "You think this was all planned?" Sarah didn't answer. She didn't have to. They both knew it was. That night, Sarah didn't go home. She went back. Not to the ruins, those were now cordoned off by tape and flooded with investigators who would find nothing but ashes and confusion. No, she went to the local archives, the town's forgotten basement records room, where yellowing newspapers slept under dust and mold. If this curse had history, it had to be buried here. The librarian, a woman with tired eyes and nicotine fingers, barely glanced up when Sarah flashed her badge and asked for old property deeds and criminal case files. "Take whatever you need," she muttered, unlocking the back room. "Nobody's touched those in years." Sarah spent hours there, combing through brittle pages. It wasn't until almost 2 a.m. that she found the first real clue. April 1947, Mikhail Petrov, immigrant from Eastern Europe, reported missing under mysterious circumstances. Last seen entering the estate of a young medical student named Elias Harper. Elias Harper. That was the old man's name. Another article from 1961 showed a grainy black and white photo of Elias, then a man in his 30s, receiving a grant for experimental biological research. His eyes, even in the faded image, had that same emptiness she'd seen in the basement. The deeper she dug, the more strange patterns emerged: missing persons. Always close to Elias. Over decades. Disappearances that were never solved, but never forgotten. He had been feeding something. Always. And no one stopped him. She ran her fingers over the name Mikhail again. The chained man. The first sacrifice. Or the first victim. As she turned the last page of a torn file, something slipped out, a photo. Blurry. Time-stained. But it showed a group of men standing in a circle around a strange object, a cube-shaped box with those same carvings. In the margin was a handwritten note. Property of the Order of the Eternal Vessel. Her heart stopped. An order? This wasn't just Elias. This was something older. Bigger. The next morning, Sarah met Ryan in the abandoned church near the river, a place they used for cases they didn't want overheard. When she showed him the photo, his expression darkened. "I found the same symbol," he said, rolling up his sleeve to show his forearm. "I thought it was dirt. But it's burned into my skin. The same rune. From the box. They were marked. Whoever they are," Ryan said, "they didn't want us to destroy that box. And now they know who we are." Sarah nodded. "I think Elias wasn't working alone. I think the box was part of something bigger. A group. Maybe a cult. Or worse." Ryan looked away, eyes haunted. "What do we do now?" Sarah didn't answer for a long time. Then she said, "We find them. And we finish this." It started with the symbols. Sarah traced them through old texts, books on folklore, journals from missing anthropologists, cryptic religious writings that had been banned centuries ago. All of them mentioned something called the vessel. A container of life. Or of death. Depending on how it was used. In Eastern European legend, the vessel was said to be created by a monk who defied death itself. It could trap a soul. Feed on it. Or release it. The rituals varied, but the ending was always the same: madness. Corruption. Devotion to something that should not exist. The Order of the Eternal Vessel was a real group. An underground society of immortality seekers who believed pain and sacrifice opened the gateway to a higher state of being. The box was just a tool. The real weapon was belief. The more Sarah read, the more she realized, Elias wasn't even the worst of them. He was just the last. That night, Sarah received a package at her door. No return address. No postage. Inside was a single item, a journal. The first page was scrawled with a note. "You're getting too close. Read this before it's too late." It was Elias's handwriting. The journal was old, the leather cracked and stained. But the entries inside were clear, and horrifying. He had been recruited by the Order in 1945, drawn in by promises of eternal life. He'd been a young doctor then, searching for a cure for a wasting disease that had taken his mother. The Order had approached him with ancient scrolls, tests of pain and endurance. He had passed them all. He spoke of Mikhail as the first vessel. The experiment that failed because he didn't follow the ritual correctly. But instead of dying, Mikhail had been trapped between life and death, feeding off Elias's own lifespan like a parasite. So Elias started again. And again. Dozens of victims. Each time, refining the ritual. Each time, coming closer to perfection. He never found it. His final entry read: "The box is not a tool. It is a prison. And now, I am the prisoner." The handwriting ended abruptly. Sarah stared at the last page for a long time. Then she turned on the light. Because something was standing in the dark corner of her room. At first, it looked like a man. But then it opened its eyes. Dozens of them. And every one was whispering her name. The thing in Sarah's room didn't move. It didn't need to. Its presence filled every inch of space, like darkness was folding into itself, watching her from behind those inhuman eyes, dozens of them, glowing faintly, each blinking at a different rhythm. But it wasn't the eyes that terrified Sarah. It was the voice. A chorus. Ancient. Soft. Patient. "We waited for you." Sarah's gun hung useless at her side. Her breath came in shallow gulps. The wooden fragment in her pocket was burning like a brand, pulsing in time with the whispers. "You carry the vessel's breath," the voice said. "The last ember." Then it vanished. No flicker. No warning. Just silence. Sarah collapsed against the wall, trembling, heart racing. She fumbled for her phone and called Ryan. No answer. She tried again. Still nothing. And then her phone lit up on its own. Incoming transmission. Unknown number. The screen turned black. A symbol began to draw itself slowly, as if scratched from inside the glass. It was the same rune on the box. Then a voice. Not the creature's voice. Ryan's. "Sarah, if you're seeing this, they've got me." Her heart clenched. "I followed a lead to the docks, an old warehouse near Pier 14. Thought it was just another dead end. But it's real, Sarah. The order's real. They're still alive. They've never stopped. And the box? It's not the beginning. It's the end." Static crackled through the recording. She leaned closer. "They call it the passage. The vessel was never about eternal life. It was about building a bridge. One that lets them come through. They've been preparing this for decades. Elias thought he could control it, but he just opened the door. They're using us, Sarah. Using pain as the currency." A cough. Something crashing. Then Ryan's voice again. "If I don't make it out, don't try to save me. Burn everything. Don't let them finish the ritual." The screen went black. Sarah didn't think. She drove. Rain hammered the windshield as she raced down the coast toward Pier 14, the storm above raging like a reflection of her own panic. The streets were nearly deserted, and as she approached the industrial docks, the headlights illuminated the sagging silhouette of an old warehouse. It looked dead. But her bones told her otherwise. She parked and stepped out, gun drawn, fragment clutched in her fist. The doors to the warehouse were open. Just slightly. She stepped through. And the world changed. Inside, it wasn't just darkness, it was wrong. The air buzzed with a low hum. The floor felt soft, like she was walking on something alive. Symbols pulsed on the walls in dim, bloody light. Candles floated in midair, suspended by unseen forces. Then she saw him. Ryan. He was strapped to a crude wooden altar, shirt torn, blood oozing from shallow cuts on his arms. His eyes were open, but blank. A woman stood over him. Wearing a cloak that looked older than dust. Her face was calm. Peaceful, even. "You're early," the woman said. Sarah raised her gun. "Step away from him." But the woman didn't move. "He's not yours anymore. He's a gate now. Just like Elias was." The realization hit Sarah like a slap. Elias hadn't been trying to live forever, he'd been trying to contain something. To keep it from spreading. And the fragment in her pocket? It wasn't a curse. It was the key. "You don't have to die tonight," the woman said softly. "You can join us. See the other side. Carry the vessel into the next world." Sarah fired. The bullet hit the woman square in the chest, and she didn't even flinch. The air shimmered around her, and then she began to change. Her face split in two, revealing something beneath, something that wasn't human. A writhing mass of eyes, teeth, and flesh that shouldn't exist in any reality Sarah knew. Then the altar began to glow. Ryan screamed. The symbols on the walls flared to life. The ritual had begun. Sarah ran. She didn't know what she was doing, just that she had to stop the circle. The floating candles, the runes, the blood, it was all part of it. All feeding the summoning. She ripped a torch from the wall and hurled it at the altar. It caught instantly. Fire raced across the floor, devouring the blood-soaked wood. The creature shrieked, not in pain, but in rage. Then Sarah felt it. The fragment in her pocket was vibrating violently. She pulled it out, and it floated from her palm, spinning in midair. A crack appeared in the floor. No, not a crack. A door. The same kind she'd seen in her dreams. Wooden, black, with the rune carved into its center. The creature screamed, "Don't!" But it was too late. Sarah slammed the fragment into the rune. And the door opened. The sound that came through wasn't sound. It was madness. Raw, hungry madness. The creature, half woman, half nightmare, was yanked toward the opening like a puppet with its strings cut. Screaming. Fighting. But the pull was too strong. Then the altar shattered. Ryan fell to the ground, coughing, gasping. Sarah dragged him away as the darkness consumed the warehouse. The door pulsed once more, then imploded in a shockwave of light. And the world went quiet. Morning. The warehouse was gone. Nothing left but ash and ruins. No police. No order. Just silence. Ryan sat beside Sarah on the trunk of her car, arms wrapped in bandages, eyes red-rimmed. "Do you think it's over?" he asked. Sarah didn't answer at first. She stared at the only thing that had survived, the fragment. Still warm. Still whispering. "No," she finally said. "But I think we bought time." He nodded slowly. "What now?" Sarah looked out at the sea. The sun was rising. The world was still turning. But under the surface, something was shifting. She stood. "We tell the world. All of it. We burn their myths. Expose the order. Every document. Every victim. We find others who survived. Who heard the whispers. We warn them. We build our circle." Ryan looked up. "You want to fight them?" "I want to stop them," she said. "Even if it takes the rest of our lives." He smiled faintly. "Then I'm with you." 6 months later. The podcast episode was titled, "The Box, Truth Behind the Order of the Eternal Vessel." It had 1 million downloads in a week. Sarah and Ryan shared their story. No names. No dates. Just facts. Survivors began reaching out. Others who'd seen the symbol. Who'd lost time. Who'd heard the whispers. And slowly, quietly, a network formed. They called themselves, the Watchers. The fight wasn't over. But the silence was broken. Final reflection. Sometimes the monsters we fear aren't hiding in shadows, they're walking beside us. Wearing skin. Smiling kindly. Offering miracles. Elias wasn't a villain. He was a warning. And the box? It wasn't a curse. It was a mirror. A mirror that showed what we become, when we try to outrun death. In the end, Sarah realized something terrifying. The door had never needed a key. It just needed someone desperate enough to knock.